Projection's not always bad. In fact, there can be such a thing as positive projections. Projection can be individual within the person, or it could also be societal. Hi, this is Jim Breon, and welcome to our YouTube channel where we discuss all things mental health. The topic of discussion today is something we've had questions about, and that is, how do I know when someone is projecting onto me? So I'm going to talk about what projection is and how you can recognize when it's happening. Projection is what we think of in psychology as a defense mechanism. There are a number of different defense mechanisms, and we'll probably do more videos on different defense mechanisms like denial, rationalization, splitting, sublimation, and reaction formation, talking about those different things. So projection is, it sort of sounds like what it is. It's when a person projects their emotions or their fears, whatever they're feeling inside, onto another person. It could be when they accuse another person of something that is actually happening inside of them. Projection's not always bad. In fact, there can be such a thing as positive projections, which often helps people to fall in love because you can project your positive hopes, expectations onto another person and see them in that person. But there's also negative projection, and that can help people learn how to hate others and demonize others. And that's when projection really starts to engage the dark side of a human being. In that sense, projection is when we project often our disowned feelings onto somebody else, the parts of us that we don't feel comfortable with or don't want to recognize. And it starts to become dangerous when those parts are denied in the self, and then when projection becomes a primary defense mechanism. I think probably everybody at some point in time might rely on projection, but when it becomes one of your primary defense mechanisms, it really suggests sort of a split between the self and the conscious self. Homophobia, misogyny, racism, those types of things are really a form of projection, and projection can be individual within the person, or it could also be societal. When you look at the horrors that happened in Nazi Germany or Rwanda in the 1990s, you can start to see what happens when people project their fears onto another group of people. And I think we can see a lot of projection in our current day, especially when you look at some of the bizarre conspiracy theories that people believe in and promote. There's a lot of projection in things like the QAnon conspiracy and the extreme MAGA movement in the United States. And projection is often behind racial violence. So some of the ways that you can tell if somebody is projecting onto you, and a lot of times this happens in toxic relationships where there's an abuser in the relationship or a narcissist in the relationship. When someone's anger or their reactions are over the top a lot and disproportionate, that can really reflect an internal conflict, and especially if they're projecting that onto you, blaming you unjustly, or when a person seems to live in an emotion-driven fantasy world. So projection, it protects us from feeling our difficult emotions and experiencing the part of our psyche that we don't want to accept or look at. When it comes to healing these defense mechanisms, or maturing them rather, psychodynamic therapy that looks at the origins of the development of our defense mechanisms can help us to do that, to mature those. And by doing that, we can actually improve our relationships, improve our psychological functioning, and our emotional health. So when we look at projection, especially in terms of what happens in a toxic relationship, maybe where there's a narcissist in the relationship, projection is unconscious. So they can't and they won't accept their projections. And if you call them out on it, what's going to happen is then they're going to up the ante. They're going to start gaslighting you. convincing you or trying to convince you that you're crazy, that you're not making sense. And if you continue to call them out on it, what's going to happen is they're going to double down on that. So because that projection is unconscious, they can't admit it. And when you start pulling the cover back, they have to up the ante. You can see what that looks like in the current political situation. There's an election, the current president loses the election and then lies about it and then accuses the other side of stealing the election. All the time his cronies are trying to steal the election. And then when it's called out, they gaslight people and try to convince them that there's evidence when there isn't, and that they can't trust their own judgment, they can't believe what they see on TV. And the more that's called out, the more they double down. You can see how that process plays out in real life. When you start to recognize projections, what you want to do is try to remain calm and not become reactive to them, because they can actually be a real insight into a person's psychology. When you start to see that they're projecting things onto you, it's really an opportunity to look at what's happening inside of them. And talking about narcissists, there's a saying that I think holds a lot of truth, that when a narcissist is making an accusation, they're actually making a confession. In projection, the idea is to make everybody else responsible for their feelings. And with a narcissist, it's all about protecting their image and their sense of self. Now, projection can be a learned behavior, and it can lead to things like perfectionism, conflict avoidance, disowned sadness or anger, or vulnerability. And that can play out in a lot of different ways in people's relationships, particularly. A healthy person will be able to recognize if they're projecting something onto somebody, admit that, maybe even apologize and correct their behavior. And the way that you start to overcome projection is by working on developing really honest self-awareness, and something we think of as metacognition, being able to look at and think about the nature of your own thoughts, and really developing a collaborative relational stance. So projection happens in a lot of people's lives. I think we can all do it from time to time. It's dangerous when it starts to become a primary defense mechanism. And if you find that it's something that you do, work on that honest self-reflection and owning those projections. And when you can do that, it can really improve relationships, and people can develop much more authentic connections. We'll talk more about different defense mechanisms in some other videos. If the videos are helpful, I encourage you to like and subscribe, sign up for notifications, and we'll let you know when more material is coming out. Take care.